they do vibrate in our unconscious in a way so like you take a fairy tale trope like Sleeping Beauty, the sleeping for 100 years. If I just say that to myself, there's something about it that is ringing a truth that is deep. And I can look at, this is what I do, is I like to look at what is that saying about me or you.
Hey, readers and writers. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of Read and Write. Today I'm chatting with creator Laura Lewis Barr about fairy tales. So hi, Laura. How you doing?
Hey, I'm very excited. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's so nice actually to finally connect with you. I think it's, been like 2 months since we originally talked.
At least, yes.
So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Well, I was a person that was always kind of struggling between my love of psychology and my love of theater.
Mm-hmm.
And a while ago, I was studying to be a psychologist in a transpersonal psychology program. And I studied Jung and loved it. But I just kept feeling called by the muse. So I spent many years teaching theater, writing theater, directing
Mm-hmm.
theater. When the pandemic hit, I lost my day work, which was doing a lot of coaching on public speaking, but also
Mm-hmm.
storytelling.
Right.
And I started making full time these fairy tale inspired stop motion films in my basement. And fortunately or unfortunately, that has really become my life as my day job still is sputtering given the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I spend my days really swimming in fairy tales, and fairy tales is very central to Jungian psychology and healing and work.
Okay. I have two things to say to this. One, I understand how the pandemic hobby can take over your life. That is what the podcast originally started out as.
Right.
Um, and also, can you expound a bit on Young and the fairy tale connection for me? I wasn't aware of it.
Yes, yes. Well, actually, it was one of his chief students, Marie Louise von Franz,
Hmm.
who started studying fairy tale, but she was doing it through his lens, the Jungian lens.
Hmm. Well, can
And
we pause and just explain what the Jungian lens would be in case readers aren't aware?
sure, so Carl Jung, around the same time as Freud,
Hmm.
was doing work that was at first similar to Freud's work, very much about the unconscious. And Freud
Okay.
pretty much discovered the unconscious,
Hmm.
rediscovered it. But Jung's work became much more spiritual, and one of the main things he talked about were the archetypes,
Okay.
which are these forms, sort of like Plato's forms. They exist within us and within everything
Hmm.
as a sort of a template. And I'm sorry, like I talk about one thing and it's going to reach another thing, and that's how
No, that's
archetypes
okay.
are.
I'm thinking about the archetypes, and I actually have, I don't know, some website pamphlet pinned somewhere that I actually, when I'm plotting out a story, sometimes I look at the archetypes and, like, just, I don't know, try to not necessarily try to base a character on them, but I definitely do sometimes use them as a guide when I'm
And do
doing
you
fictional characters.
and are you doing Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey as as a template?
Uh, sort of, like, I'm aware of it, but I'm not following it. I don't follow it closely, but yes, I'm aware of it, and sometimes I do try to connect with it and make sure that what I'm writing actually is a good story, and sometimes I use that as a base just to compare to what I'm doing against.
Yeah. So what
If that
you
makes any sense.
total sense, right, and it all sort of is interrelated. So
Mhm,
Jung was the guy who started to see these patterns in people's dreams and people's symptoms,
mhm,
and then Marie Louise von Franz started to see these in the fairy tales, so that the fairy tales, if you read them psychologically, they talk about what's happening in our psychology.
mhm.
Joseph
Makes
Camp
sense since a lot of them were based on real life events. Yeah, makes sense.
Well, and the other thing that is interesting about them is that they're an oral history, right? And
Right.
so they came over time, over centuries. And so people's psychology gets filtered through that. And the stories that are retold are the ones that are the most impactful.
Mhm.
And they're the ones that are impacting our psychology.
Right. It's just a wheel. It just keep going around and around and around.
Yeah. And Joseph Campbell was influenced by Jung, and he saw the hero's journey in all the myths, and they're also in the
Mhm.
fairy tales.
Right.
Yeah. I I hope that was somewhat helpful to your question.
Yeah, I think so. We meandered a bit, but yes, I think at its core, it definitely did its job.
Okay, we can come back. Yeah, if I wasn't clear, ask another.
Okay. Um, so be before we kinda jump in a little bit, I wanna know, like, why did you choose fairy tales to be the subject of your work?
Well, it was because I have a great love of what Jung's work is about.
Mhm,
Uh, so for me, his work is very psychologically exciting, and it's also spiritual. And
mhm.
so um, I've read everything Maria Louise von Franz has written, and it's a lot.
Okay,
And she's got lots of books on fairy tales and exploring what they mean psychologically, and they meant so much to me. So that's one answer to the question.
okay.
But the other answer to the question is that fairy tales are such a fantastic vehicle for riffing off of, that they're almost like they're just sort of a given that you're going to get a plot that is powerful because it's been circulating for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So
Mhm,
there's a goodness to that skeleton, that why should I create something from scratch when we have these skeletons around that I can grab and use?
mhm. Why do you think they have such a why do you think fairy tales have such a wide appeal?
Yeah.
What is
I
it about them?
Great. That is the question, right? And I
Right.
think I think it is because they do vibrate in our unconscious in a way that, so like you take a fairy tale trope like Sleeping Beauty, the sleeping for 100 years. If I just say that to myself, there's something about it that is ringing a truth that is deep, and
Mhm,
I can look at, or I this is what I do, is I like to look at, what is that saying about me or you or any of us, to sleep for 100 years? What is that a metaphor of psychologically?
mhm,
So I think that's what fairy tales do, even if we're not aware of them. They are vibrating at a really deep level. Um, well, and I've done research on storytelling anyway, and stories land in the brain in a just a completely different way than any other kind of information does. I think fairy
right.
tales is just that much more.
Okay. I'm thinking about I can't well, I was doing some research for this episode, and I was reading some of the, I don't wanna say original because I probably was not reading original, I was reading some kind of translated whatever version of fairy tales, and I have to say, you talked about the Sleeping Beauty one, I was really scarred by some of those original ones, and Sleeping Beauty was one of
Uh-huh.
those. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting that it changes from this horrific story to something that we look back on with fondness.
You bring up such a really important issue regarding fairy tales. Those who study them know that they've been kind of whitewashed, especially by Disney, but the
Mhm.
originals are terrifying often, and um, they are cautionary tales about what can happen if you don't live your life in a way that's wholesome. Bad
Mhm.
things can happen.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, they're but again, I mean, isn't that what makes them kind of juicy? But I'm curious what was horrific to you?
Well, I guess with the Sleeping Beauty one in particular, it was just that she fell into a coma, she was left alone in a castle, this random king/hunter came by and raped her, and then she had kids from it while she was still unconscious. It's just I don't know.
Oh,
Something
wow.
about that is
Oh,
just
wow. Oh, wow. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and, like, the other 2 that really did it for me were Bluebeard, and Snow White.
Yeah.
Um, like, learning that Bluebeard was based off of Joan of Arc's, companion, I've forgotten his name, even though it was just yesterday, I forgot his name already. And he was a serial killer of children, and, like, as a mom, I'm just like, I'm completely scarred by this.
Right, right. It's interesting, I don't remember that version of the rape, but, I'm not
Okay.
surprised.
I'm sure I have it in my browser history, so if you want, I can always forward it to you after this,
Yes.
and I can put it in the in show notes in case anybody wants to read it, but it was I don't know, I was definitely like, "Wow, I didn't realize." I mean, I knew fairy tales were that was the point of them in the original part was that they were cautionary tales. I mean, I think a lot of people know that about them, but I didn't realize just how dark some of them were, and especially the ones that were based off of real people. You're just like, "Holy crap." Like Snow White, was what where I was reading Snow White was, she was this real person in, Eastern Europe. I don't remember the exact country now, but she was, somebody's rival, and they poisoned her. Like, just she did not have a happy after, she died from poison.
Yeah. So I have two things about that.
Mhm,
I think when a real life story is turned into a tale and then it's
mhm,
told and retold and retold and retold, I think what seeps out are the original details from the area, but
uh-huh,
what remains might be a more symbolic story, because fairy tales typically, as opposed to like legends, fairy
mhm,
tales are very skeletal, right? They usually,
right,
oftentimes, there's no names,
mhm,
there's no places, there's no feelings. They just retain sort of this structure.
right,
Um, so even though it was based perhaps on some real thing, the
mhm.
other thing about that is there are Snow White type tales around the
Right, all over the
world.
place, and they
Right.
get combined and I don't know, this and that.
Right. And that kind of proves the archetypes that these universal ideas are sprouting up with their own cultural slant to them, but they're
Mhm,
sprouting up around the world. But the other thing I want to say is there's a famous fairy tale you might know called The Girl Without Hands.
mhm,
And it's, man, the father lets her get her hands chopped off, or
uh-huh,
he chops off her hands. I can't remember, but her hands get chopped off.
mhm,
And I think the issue with fairy tales, maybe for us, maybe back in the day, people thought more symbolically, because
mhm.
what the Jungians do with this tale is to say, what is it like to be a woman and to not be able to reach for what we want? And
Okay,
so it is the symbol of losing our hands. There's a lot of symbolism that they see in these tales, instead of, because if you only read them literally, then yeah, they become pretty much like, what the hell?
mhm,
So, I mean, they still pack a punch, I think, on our unconscious, even if they're like dreams, even if we don't quite understand them, they still work on us.
right,
Um, but I think for our culture, these killings and maimings and rapes and all of that, I think there's another way to read those fairy tales symbolically, in the
Okay.
same way that we would read those things in our dreams symbolically.
That's a fair point. I think one of the most interesting things to me about fairy tales is how they do change. You
Mm,
know, you take this really like awful beginning and then like you said, they're oral traditions usually. So things get left out, things get changed, they get combined with another story that somebody else knows and they change and they mold fitting whatever time or setting they're told in.
sure. Yeah. But this kind of core piece remains, which is what
Mhm.
I find so fascinating. To me, they are like skeletons that you can put flesh on. You have to fleshen them up, otherwise, there's not as much, to hook into.
Right.
But as a writer, there's such a wonderful skeletal structure. That's what I
Mhm.
dig.
So what inspired you to start this project?
Um, Yes. So I have been writing plays for a long time. And
Mhm.
one of them, so this is an amazing story. I answered an ad in Craigslist.
Okay.
People were looking for a script
Okay.
and they wanted to make a film, and they were new filmmakers, and they chose my script, and we made the film for basically the cost of feeding the people that were there. So it was like a no
Mhm.
budget film, but I fell in love with film, and I got to edit that film. And filmmaking is, as somebody who has been writing plays for a long time and hoping that somebody will produce them, um, I bought a camera and I started to do my own thing, and it was like, oh my god, I can finish the writing project, I
Mhm.
can complete it. I started with dolls because I wanted to learn the camera. I was really intimidated by working the camera, and the
Mhm.
dolls were very patient and would just wait as I tried to figure it
Right.
out, right? And then
Unlike
I
the
felt
dogs, they never move.
yes, exactly. And unlike real live actors. So then I fell in love with stop motion, and then the pandemic hit. So it all sort of cascaded into me being
Mhm.
in my basement all day long making these films.
If you don't mind me backtracking a bit, what was that first, script about?
Sure. Well, part of the reason why it was chosen, it was a two-person romantic comedy, so we only needed two actors, and it
Mhm.
took place in one or two or three locations. It didn't have a lot of locations, so
Okay.
it was a romantic comedy about a husband and a wife who are in hard times. She runs off to a monastery to kind of escape him, and he follows her. And
Okay.
it's their struggle to get back together, and their struggle around. Um, he's an atheist, and she's struggling to find what she believes.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
sounds
called
interesting.
Cloistered Honey, and
Uh-huh.
it was on Amazon for a while. And yeah, it got into couple film festivals, and it was like, wow.
Wow, that must have felt amazing.
Well, and the most amazing was when you do a play and the run is over, it's over.
Mhm.
But like a podcast, a film lasts forever. And that's
Mhm.
fantastic. So,
That is really awesome. And like I said, that must have felt amazing, like, getting into a film festival or something, and then seeing your work on Amazon. I mean, like, this one, like, "Wow, I did that." It's always nice.
yes, yes. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Yeah.
So, what's your method for rewriting the fairy tales? I wanna know, like, how do you start? Like, how do you pick which one? I'm intensely curious about this.
Oh, wonderful. I tend to choose well, at the beginning I was choosing fairy tales that either just wowed me, or I had read something that helped me understand another level of them.
Okay.
So I would do something Marie Louise von Franz had the word of looking at something. She had
Mhm.
analyzed it.
Right.
Could not find that word. Um, yes, but I th I think as I move forward, so I did a fairy tale called The Three Languages that she
Mhm.
talks a lot about in one of her books, and in this fairy
I watched
tale.
that one. Yeah, that's one of the ones of yours I watched.
Oh, fantastic. So now you'll know exactly, yeah.
Mhm.
So, first of all, it's originally a guy and his father, and I made it a
Mhm.
woman and her mother because, I'm just tired of it all being men, men, men all the time,
Mhm.
right? Uh, but and this is a classic tale you can read about in many ways. The hero has to learn the language of the animals. And so the hero learns the language of the dogs, the birds, and the frogs.
Mhm.
And I started to ask myself, what would it be like to learn the language of the frogs? Like, what would that be? And as I riffed on that in my head, I thought, well, it would be about getting into my own muck. It would be about the willingness to get into the muck. It would
Mhm.
be about the sliminess of life. And so
Mhm.
this is what I do. I try to riff on the symbols and see where
Okay.
they take me. Um, and as a playwright, I think really in terms of scenes. So sometimes I'm going to riff around a scene. Right now, I'm working on the Grail legend where Percival goes to the Fisher King's castle and he doesn't ask the question and he loses the chance to see the Grail and find the Grail.
Mhm.
And it's one of the Arthur legends. And I've written whole scenes just to be about Percy's, I call him Percy instead of Percival, Percy's becoming a man. To me, that's what the story is about. He has to become a man. In the original tales, he's a jerk or he's stupid or he doesn't understand women. He treats them awful. And I don't know these tales that well, that tale,
Mhm.
so I can riff a little easier. I'm not so worried about being married to it exactly. Um, so I might write a whole, and I like comedy, so I might write a whole comic scene about. I did write a comic scene about Percy trying to sell the idea of putting cardboard into a loaf of bread to save money for the company. And
Okay.
I wrote a whole scene about this just because the scene was kind of fun, and that's putting
Mhm.
flesh on the bones. Um, Again, ask me again if I'm not really answering the question.
No, this is great. How many, I know, like, I'm trying to equate it to what I understand, which is writing, like writing a novel, writing a manuscript. How many drafts do you go through? I mean, do you write and film scenes that you then discard in the final version?
Great question. I yeah, really interesting. So I've spent many years writing scripts and getting them rejected
Mhm.
and getting them rejected and getting them rejected forever.
Mhm.
And then when I started making my own stuff, I looked back at these scripts and went, well, are any of these worthy to be made? And I
Mhm.
did take a couple and I did film them and they got into film festivals. So there, you know. And I bring that up because I think for me, I'm not sure everybody can get what I'm trying to do in a script. But when it becomes a film, people more are more likely to get it. Or maybe like I've had some screenplays read in table reads with live actors and then
Mhm.
people get it. So to answer your question, I generally don't intend to write and film and then discard, but it is a little weird for me. I don't usually get feedback on my scripts. I just don't have people to do that for me.
Mhm.
And so I get feedback on the films. And then it's like, "Oh crap." Um I do a lot of my own voiceovers, so I can fix things
Mhm.
using some voiceover. Typically, what isn't working is that people don't understand certain moments because the dolls don't have the same ability as a human actor to
Right.
um and
To
the this
emote.
yeah, to make it clear. And I think that this journey is such a journey in how to visually tell a story, because I think, yeah, it's such a different, you really have to break it down, right? And
Mhm.
that was my
Right.
big learning at the beginning, was I wasn't breaking things down enough, and hopefully I am doing that more. But as a creative, that you ask 10 people about your project and you'll get 10 often wildly different takes on what you've done.
Mhm.
And figuring out what's valuable to you and what isn't is
Right.
a real art in itself.
I feel like, especially with creators, I'm sure it's all life, but especially with people who create, I mean, I feel like it's just one giant constant learning process. You're constantly refining your how you do things and how you make a final product.
For sure, for sure. And I admire Judd Apatow, his
Mhm.
work, and he has done some webinars about his process. And, not everybody likes what he's doing. He's just doing it. He's
Right, just
just
doing it for
hacking
the joy of
away.
doing it, right.
Well,
He's
he
not
does it for more than that. He makes a lot of
Sure.
money, but yeah.
So, talking about the dolls, why choose Barbies to as your models?
Well, I guess mostly because I'm not a physical artist to make my own.
Okay.
So that was my first, like, I can't make stop motion figurines. I don't have that talent.
Mhm.
But then I started to see that, like, there's an unlimited number of Barbie and action figures that I can purchase that um, have such diversity. And
Right.
I could buy, if you Google anything like Barbie ski set, Barbie anything, you find it. And I don't, and so that helps. I do make some things, but
Mhm.
um and I manipulate their faces, as so that I can kind of get some empathy and some human I can get some empathy through mirror
Mhm.
neurons or whatever through their
Right.
faces.
So, do you rack up a lot of costs doing this? I mean, I imagine that that could be an expensive hobby with ordering Barbie skis and Barbie set, or do you get a lot of them used or secondhand?
Almost everything I try to get secondhand.
It makes
So
sense.
I think for making films, I am at like the lowest you can be, right?
Mhm.
I pay yearly for music licensing. I pay yearly for editing software, and then yeah, Barbie and sets and stuff. But I think as a hobby, I don't know if it's a hobby anymore, but
I know, I'm sorry. I use the term loosely, but I'm glad you
yeah,
understand what I mean.
yeah, yeah.
I'm trying not to offend anybody.
No, no, it's certainly a passion, and I hope someday I don't know if you're doing this, but there's the creative part of me, but there is this part of me that goes, I don't want to just make them for no reason. I'd like them to live and have and serve a purpose. And
Mhm.
so I do market them in various ways, and they are in film festivals. So we'll see what
That's
happens. It's
nice.
still
It's always
early
nice to get your
days.
name out there and just show people what you're doing. Because not only is it just nice to have people that are viewing it, it's also nice, like, to get that feedback too. Like, I know, for me, like, I can write all day long, but it's just nicer knowing that I don't know how to describe it, but it's like it's better somehow knowing that somebody else has read it.
For sure. I mean, I think about people like Van Gogh who did it and then died and then they appreciated it.
Uh-huh.
But, I'd prefer to think that there's some goodness that it gives other people while I'm still alive.
Mhm.
So,
So what kind of research do you do? to make one of these? Like you said, right now you're doing the Percival series. Like, what kind of lead up do you do before you actually start the writing and the shooting and the et cetera?
Yeah, I don't think I do a ton of research, but yeah, I read the legends or the stories online. I read what people write about them. I think again, I'm trusting what this is what's so cool is that it's a work of fiction. So I have a lot of leeway, and
Mhm.
I think the way I work is I like to swim in it for a while and then I let it go and I just create from my
Okay.
experience of it instead of going moment by moment and trying to find an analogy to that. I
Okay.
mean, some of them, like the Percival one, I I think that one is such like a book length work
Okay.
that I didn't do the whole thing. I took the bare bones of idea and ran with it. Something
Mhm.
like the three languages, that's only a one and a half page fairy tale. I can take every moment. So I guess it varies depending on the source material.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean by you like to swim in it? Like, just, I don't know, walk around thinking about it all day, or I don't know, describe that for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Well, the whole reason why I even chose this story is because I kept saying to people, I kept using the metaphor of this is my holy grail. I found myself
Mhm.
talking in terms of that metaphor with people about stuff in my life. And I thought, well, if this is alive in me that I keep using that,
Mhm.
then let's read the story, or the basics of the story. And then, yeah, then think about what is it to, well, I guess I think for me, I have to find the hook of the
Okay.
story. And for me, the hook of the story and that became the title is Percy Grows Up. So the hook of the story isn't so much, I mean, well, it's two hooks of the story. I I had read years ago about this idea that when we're young,
Mhm.
we often have a vision of something very holy in our lives. And then we may spend the rest of our lives chasing that. And then when we're older, we may get a second glimpse of it. Well,
Mhm.
that is the story of the Grail legend that Percival screws it up. And then in some versions, he gets a second chance. Um, well, I just can relate to that in my bones. But the hook for me became Percy's a jerk and he has to grow up, and looking at sort of male psychology, which I haven't really done before. And that became the thing I was thinking about. Men
Okay.
get a little bashed in this piece.
Oh, no.
I had a voice actor. I said, I'm really sorry. The men are kind of taking it in this piece, but it's a comedy. So you get to exaggerate with comedy,
Okay.
which is what I love.
Has your Percy, been released yet, or are you still working on it?
Oh yeah, I'm just starting this one. So I'm
Okay.
I'm finishing one scene and I have many to go. It feels really complicated. Oh, here's a very interesting thing to tell you.
Yeah.
When I write without a thought of production. And when I'm finished with the script, I give it to the director, who is me.
He gives you the
But
director portion of your brain?
Right. But the director, I don't think about, like, I don't write by going, well, I have this prop or this set, or I know I can do this. I don't go that way. The writer just follows the muse and writes the thing. And the director's like,
Mhm.
how the heck am I supposed to do this? And the writer says, figure it out. And so for me, there's a goodness in that the writer can really, I think first and foremost, I'm a writer.
Mhm.
And then I make films, but And I make films so that the writing can live, you know?
Right.
I'm not brave enough to self-publish stuff and try to get people to look at it that way. I wanna wanna find another way for people to get my writing. Um, but yes, so the writing and the directing are really separated in my mind, and so I'm this one feels really complicated, and I it'll it's always that struggle. How the heck am I gonna do this? And I know
Mhm.
writers who don't even make films get in that all the time. Like they get their characters into a certain thing, and how the heck am I gonna get them out of here? You
I
know
can
that
100% relate to that. I just spent 2 weeks trying to get a group of characters out of a room over and over and over again.
exactly. And it's that obstacle that frees up the creative process, I think.
Mhm.
So,
How long does it take you to shoot one of these? Normally, it sounds like Percy might be abnormal, but normally, how long does it take you to, like, to shoot and produce one?
um, yeah, I don't know that I have a easy answer for that, but let's just say 4 months maybe ish
Okay. Is that,
to I
like,
mean
writing start all the way to, like, publishing?
yeah, yeah. It could be. So I have films that are 3 minutes long, and I have
Mhm.
my longest is like 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, and some of them are just simpler for various reasons. Uh, yeah, Percy's going to be really complicated, I'm afraid.
Mhm.
And the
It
director,
is stop motion, so that does add a significant amount of time to
right,
your work.
that's always gonna be a tough but there are simpler versions and harder versions, but let's say 4 to 6 months, but yeah, within that,
Mhm.
which
Okay.
is very rapid. My stop motion is pretty, scrappy. It's not this purely well, you saw it. It's not this
Mhm.
purely fluid, perfect, um, computer looking computerized looking thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, since it does take you 4 to 6 months to do one of yours, are you working on multiple at a time?
No. No, I work at w I sometimes I've written some I have some written ready to go, but
Uh-huh.
and then I decided I didn't wanna do those.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
now I don't have, any more written, and when I'm done with Percy, I'll write the next, but, I think the advantage for me is I'm writing these scripts as they're not longer than 20 pages.
Mhm.
So, I really love the short form. And I think I don't have the second act problem or the third act problem. I mean, I do, but it's all
Right, you do, it's all
compressed.
just condensed. It's like you've got, like, a short story version of a film there.
Yeah. I just think novelists, I just admire you guys so much because you get into the weeds and you're really like, you're still 200 or 100 pages from the end. And I don't have that.
Right.
So it
Oh, it's making
fits
me
me.
laugh.
Yeah.
I like that. Like, I like long form, just that's just how my brain works. I was just talking to another author, and they like short stories. They like doing those the best, and I find them particularly difficult to read. So it's personal preference, and it's how like your brain works and how you best, I don't know, transcribe the story in your head and get it out for the world.
Yeah, and somehow I am 5 foot, so I am short. My
Mhm.
films are short. My props are tiny. There's something about the tiny world, the
Uh-huh.
miniature world that somehow that's me.
I admit that is sometimes appealing. I'm going off script here for a second, but do you remember the Tiny Kitchen series that was on YouTube a while back where they would actually bake, but using like a dollhouse equipment? Like they'd have like a little quail egg and this tiny, tiny little whisk. I don't know. That's it. I don't know why that made me think of it, but yes,
Archetypal.
comfortable about small things.
There is. I do think there's something I would say archetypal. There's something like it means something on some level, and I could analyze what it is, but
Hmm.
um
Probably something
it
about stepping back and viewing it from a distance and
or childhood
mhm.
or Yeah, or the whole fairy realm stuff. I don't
Or
know.
concentrating on the details, I don't know, my brain can go in either directions, either stepping back or getting closer to focus on the details.
In Chicago at one of our museums, I can't remember which one, we have this room of these tiny doll houses that are made of like jewels or gold, or like they're
Mhm.
exquisite things, and you go
Right?
in there and it's so delightful to see these tiny little, and it's a huge exhibit. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the most difficult thing about retelling fairy tales? Like, what's the hardest part?
Oh, really good. What is the hardest part? You know, I that's a hard question for me because
Okay.
think
Is that the
it's
hardest part?
I think it's hard. It's a hard question for me because I think I have found the vehicle that works for me.
Mhm.
And so fairy riffing off of a fairy tale is so much easier for me than starting with nothing.
Okay.
And so I suppose some people may find it hard to flesh out the tale, or maybe some people might find it hard to tackle these violent images in a tale. But
Mhm.
for me, it's home. So um, it's not the only thing I do. I mean, I do write other, but people keep comparing what I write outside of fairy tales to fairy tales, so there's something
Okay.
to
So
that
there's something
too.
inside you that's really
Yeah,
drawn to that.
yeah. I mean, I think the trap of fairy tales is not fleshing them out enough and just being kind of literal with them.
Mhm.
And since the other trap, I guess, is that we've heard them so often that if we don't find something fresh to find in them, then I think they may not serve us well if we just retell it without making it finding something fresh.
Mhm. Okay.
But I think I think that's a trap, and I hope I'm working against that trap. I feel like I am.
No, I hope s I genuinely I hope you are, because I feel like it would be just easy just to, I don't know, kind of regurgitate what everybody else has done, especially with fairy tales, because I don't know, like, you think of fairy tales and you have this very specific image in your head of, I don't know, something that from childhood or whatever have formed, and each person is going to have that specific thing, so I think, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think that might be the hardest part, is trying to find the fresh angle on it.
For sure, and, you know, they are kind of bizarre, so what the heck does it mean? Like, you saw
Right?
the 3 languages, and
Mhm.
what does it mean?
Right.
What does the end mean? Well, you know, that could be a danger that it's a little opaque. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I had read that one before I saw your film of it. I wasn't familiar with 3 voices or the 3 languages.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't, it's a grim tale though. It's one of the Brothers
Okay.
Grimm.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
not one I was familiar with, and I
Sure.
considered myself well-versed, so showed me.
Well, Disney didn't do it, so.
Fair point. I've got 2 sort of favorite questions. One, I wanna know which one is the favorite one that you have done? Like, which is your favorite of your films? And then I wanted to know, what is your favorite fairy tale?
Ooh, wow. I wrote a film that is not a fairy tale, although people have said it felt like one. It's called The Split, and
Okay.
it was this this nagging. All right, I'm gonna get a little political now, just a little political.
Okay.
This nagging thought, would it be possible for our country to split into 2 nations? Because we are split. And
Mhm.
could we physically split? My husband would always say, "Nah, it'd be too impossible to do. It'd be too, how could you really do it?
They
Just
tried it once, didn't work.
logistically." Right,
Right.
logistically. And I said, "Well, I think we could." And I wrote this little script, and I think because I tackled something so um contemporary and a little bit edgy. And I guess I just like the way it turned out because there's the split between a husband and a wife at the same time that the country is splitting,
Okay.
and there's a talking dog, and yeah, there's something about that piece that is probably my favorite.
Okay.
Um, Favorite fairy tale. That is
It seemed
really
only fitting to ask at the end.
that's really tough. Fitting fairy tale. Favorite fairy tale. Oftentimes it's the one I'm working on, of course,
Mhm.
but and a favorite thing I've written I've written a book about using my films, and one way you could use my films when you watch them is to say, where are you at in the fairy tale right now? And that's how people can use
Interesting.
fairy tales.
Mhm.
So a lot of times I feel like the fairy tale I'm working on is where I'm at in the moment. um, I love the 3 languages. I'll just have to go with that. Nothing else
Okay.
is coming to my head. I love many of them. Yeah. I love it's technically a folk tale, but I love the folk tale that I made the film The Gardener. And The Gardener was only my second film, but it's a very popular one. It's a very cool little tale.
I'm not familiar with the gardener either.
And the original tale was called The Stone Cutter.
Okay.
Japanese tale.
I'll
Yeah.
have to look that up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh. I'm learning I feel like I now have, like, a couple of different fairy tales I need to go look up and read the original versions of. Well, it was great talking to you. Can you tell the listeners where they can connect with you online
Well,
and
one of
see
the
some of these stop motion films?
Oh, thank you. One of the easiest addresses is just my name. So
Mhm.
Laura, Laura, Lewis, Lewis, Bar, Barr, Films, LauraLewisBarFilms.com. That's probably the easiest. And then links
Mhm.
to my films. I have 8 films, 7 films available on a Mythic um, Daily Motion channel, Mythic Tales for
Uh-huh.
Psyche, they're called, and you can watch
That's
them
where I
for
found you initially, yes.
yeah, you can watch those 7 films for free, and yeah, yeah, and I have more, but I'm not releasing them. I have, I don't know, 7 other films, 6 or 7 other films,
Okay.
but they're still in the festival circuit, and festivals don't like you making things too available online. These are my earlier films that are free
Right.
online. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And I will, of course, include these in the show notes for anyone who wants to stop by and have an easy click.
Yay! Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for being a guest on the podcast. This was a great podcast
Oh,
episode.
what a joy. Thanks for having me.
Join me next time when I'm going to talk to Corey Bale about her foray into children's books. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, and go do what you do best. You got this. Read and Write Podcast is edited and produced by Deborah Zebarth. Theme music was written and performed by Zed Bradley. Audio effects were created by Red Octopus and Black River Phonogram. Show notes and previous episodes can be found at readandwritepodcast.com. Special thanks to Laura Lewis Barr and all the subscribers who make this podcast possible.